welcome back to the Wisconsin Files. Today, Laura and I are bringing you the case of Annie Lemberger, a young girl who was kidnapped and murdered in Madison, Wisconsin on Labor Day weekend in 1911. The details of this case are pretty crazy. There was even a book written about it. We're going to get into that right now.
It was Labor Day weekend when life for Martin and Magdalene Lemberger would change forever. Their 7-year-old daughter, Annie Lemberger, was abducted from her bedroom window September 6th of 1911. Her window had been broken into, yet no one had heard a thing, even though she shared her room with her other siblings. There would be a massive search that would ensue looking for Annie, yet no one would find a clue as to where she went or what happened to her. There were footprints outside the bedroom window, so this did coincide with the idea she had been abducted. It wouldn't be until 3 days later, on September 9th, when her naked body would be discovered in Brittingham Bay or Lake Monona. An autopsy would conclude that she had suffocated and not been a victim of drowning, despite her being discovered in a body of water.
So yeah, they've performed this large search party and nothing is found, and it isn't until September 9th, a full 3 days after the abduction, that a person finds Annie's body. I think she was found naked, and there was some bruising, but no bruising to suggest any sexual assault. I think it's very possible the window got smashed. And I mean, at the same time, I guess I've slept through heavy disturbances before. I've definitely been in a deep sleep before, and especially as a kid, you kind of pass out on the couch. Your parents can carry you to the bedroom, and you're none the wiser. You don't even remember it, So it is possible. It is possible that the window was smashed open. Yeah, okay, this case was crazy, too, because this is the second most written about child murder case in the United States. This was right next to the Lemberg child. Well, in early 20th century, this was the second most written about child murder case in the country, right next to Charles Lemberg's baby. The Lemberg baby abduction and murder, made headlines all around the world. And Annie Lemberger's case was like that for Wisconsin. It was on the front pages everywhere, and even the surrounding states were talking about the Annie Lemberger case.
Right away, suspicion would fall on a neighbor by the name of John Dogskin Johnson. He had a prior conviction for molesting 3 little girls in Wyoto, Wisconsin. He had also had the reputation of being the town criminal. It was also reported that Dogskin had burst into the room in which Annie's autopsy was taking place. All this combined, John Dogskin Johnson was already guilty in the public's mind. There was not any evidence to support that John was guilty other than what was mentioned before, making him appear suspicious.
So yeah, this was one of Madison's most historic crimes of all time, and it's one of the most high-profile unsolved cases, oldest high-profile unsolved cases in Wisconsin. And so they did convict. They actually convicted one person, and then they claimed that a second person was guilty as well later on, and they tried to exonerate the first accused person. So the first suspect in this case was John Dogskin Johnson, and John Dogskin Johnson was a Norwegian immigrant who was already a sexual offender. He had been committed for assaulting 2 girls in, I can't remember the name of this city. It was like Wausau. It might not have been Wausau. Maybe it was I can't remember, a few years prior to this case happening of molesting these 2 young girls, and he had also been charged with other petty crimes. So he's like a notorious town criminal, and an absolute delinquent. He was an easy target in the eyes of the law, and I think the community at this point were so hell-bent on getting justice for this. Yeah, they wanted anything, and I think they felt that John was the perfect scapegoat for that, even though there was no sufficient evidence other than a confession. But I think we all know how police confessions worked back in the day. They were pretty violent, pretty brutal, and John was no exception.
John Dogskin Johnson was a neighbor to the Lembergers, and being the convicted predator that he was also an easy target for public and police. Johnson was arrested and interrogated for a few days, where on the 4th day, he summoned a jailer and gave a full confession. This confession, however, would not line up with the evidence or the facts. Regardless, a sensational trial would ensue, and it wouldn't take long before a guilty verdict was read. Johnson was sentenced to life in prison, and this case seemed pretty close and shut. However, a decade would pass before a surprise witness would come forward and once again rock an entire community.
that. John unfortunately sat, I think, was it like 3 days in like an interrogation with with law enforcement, trying to get any form of information from John. And John confesses, and his confession is all over the place. It doesn't even line up with the crime scene or any of the evidence that was found. So yeah, their suspects, John Dogskin Johnson, and Dogskin was put on trial and was very quickly found guilty of the crime, and he's sentenced to life in prison. Yeah. And that his confession saved him from being lynched, and it also saved him from the death sentence. And so he obviously took it, but he recants his confession in prison, but he's still not exonerated. This is another thing about old-time cases, is newspapers would report different things. Yeah, there would be different, like, either like names would be spelt wrong, or even like John Dogskin Johnson has, like, on web forums today, I see a lot of people think that John was an African American man, and he was not. He was a white Norwegian man. But I believe that like confusion comes from May Sorensen's confession, or her alleged testimony that she saw a black man dispose of the body in Lake Monona, and it was completely fabricated. But I believe that that's where people draw that John was the black man.
Different stories.
Yeah, and they always, the papers always conflict back then. Same with Lloyd Fauntleroy's case. I noticed so many papers would flip-flop in between, like, what actually occurred and what might have occurred.
One May Sorensen would testify that it was Martin Lemberger himself that killed little Annie during one of his drunken binges. May would claim that Martin hit Annie over the head with a liquor bottle, where she then passed out and was placed in her bed, where her mother Magdalene would later find her. Not wanting any trouble for the family, it was decided to dispose of Annie in the bay, where they then hired an African American gentleman to dispose of the body. This was all a lie, however, and Sorensen would later admit that District Attorney Ole Stollen had paid her to give this false accusation. Regardless, Dogskin was released after serving 10 years in Waupun Prison, where infamous murderer Chris Watts is currently serving out his sentence.
Dogskin Johnson is accused of murdering Annie, and he recants his testimony, and it isn't until 10 years later when a hotshot lawyer shows up and says that John wasn't the man that murdered Annie, and that it was actually Annie Lemberger's father, Martin Lemberger. And May's about to really, really, really do some damage on the reputations of the Lembergers, because she is about to accuse Martin Lemberger of murdering Annie Lemberger. Now, Martin was accused of smashing Annie over the head with a beer bottle or an alcohol bottle, something to that effect, and he was in a drunken rage, and Annie died of suffocation. So May's testimony doesn't line up with any of the evidence, and now they look like murderers. People think they're child killers, but now the statute of limitations has run out, and they can't pursue a case against Martin Lemberger, but they exonerate and release John Dogskin Johnson, and they apologize for his 10 years served, and he's released. And this lawyer was later found guilty of corruption for taking bribes as a judge, and I thought that was pretty funny. So was he really a credible lawyer? Obviously not. And then May eventually comes out and says, yeah, he paid me to say this. Exactly.
So he could have a case.
Right, and he wanted to win, I think, like something like a public seat in office. He eventually gets caught up in some pretty corrupt business there. I thought that was really funny to note.
Even though they presumed Martin Lemberger guilty, he would not serve time due to the statute of limitations running up, and the family's reputation would never recover from this. They would always live under the suspicions from public. Dogskin was also awarded $5,000 for his alleged false imprisonment. Johnson would eventually die sometime later in 1938, and he would always remain guilty to those familiar with this case. So just who really murdered Annie Lemberger? Was she really a victim of her neighbor's cruel wrath, or did her father commit this heinous act? I do not believe her family had a thing to do with this tragedy. Years after Annie's passing, her father Martin would die of a stroke, and Annie's mother Magdalene would go on to sue the magazine that published May Sorensen's scathing account without proper investigation. She would win the case and went on to set up a memorial in honor of Martin and Annie with the funds. A family that had endured so much deserves proper justice. And there's so much more to this case, and I recommend you research it for yourself. And also read Mark Lemberger's book, A Crime of Magnitude, which details so much more than what I could ever in this video.
Again, Annie Lemberger's case was never solved officially. There is, a lot of there's a lot of theories, and there's a lot more details to this case that I can't cover all in this video. But like I said, if you want more thorough details, definitely read that book. It's a very good book, very informative. And you can get a lot more information from that than what we can bring to you today. Talked about either. I mean, Madison knows about it. The Madison locals know the story, but outside of that in Wisconsin, I've never heard of this case.
No.
So it's not. I heard of Lord Fauntleroy before I ever heard of Annie Lemberger, and so this was kind of crazy that I found this high-profile turn of the century case that nobody's even heard of. Yeah, and there was even a book written on it. This man has put so much effort into trying to bring some kind of closure to what happened to Annie, and I would love to read who he thought did it. So that brings us to the end of today's case. Laura and I, again, are very grateful for you guys watching us and joining us today, and we will look forward to seeing you guys in the next investigation.